Everything you hear in this story is fictional. Any resemblance to any persons or events is purely coincidental.
The Cold Case of Katie Christie.
Episode 4. The worst part about memory, Josh was coming to realise, was how it could never really be trusted, especially when a memory wasn't your own. When he thought back on his journey inside nostalgia, thinking about his memories of memories, he was all too aware of the fragility of the events. Nostalgia was meant to be as close to fact as you could get. But what you could get really wasn't that far off what you could always get. A version of events. Down by the river on that Friday afternoon, it was the first time Tess and Katie had seen each other in 14 years. Tess had spent 14 years in anguish, lamenting Jasmine's death. A death Tess thought would have been prevented had it not been for Katie. She had imagined so many ways to make Katie pay, to make her feel a fraction of what Jasmine had felt. Tess never expected Katie to have already been living the reality she dreamed for her. Tess had only seen the occasional picture of Katie at some glamorous party or on holiday every now and then on social media. She'd heard from the odd person from their hometown that Katie was always getting asked out on dates. In Tess's mind, Katie lived scot-free, guilt-free, frivolously. It seemed Katie lived the same way she did as a teenager, learning nothing and never being punished for it. It took looking at the 27-year-old woman, dressed in corporate clothes too big for her body, her distress so palpable she almost cowered away towards the water, for Tess to see that perhaps Katie was not the vapid monster of her daydreams. She was a lonely woman who'd never been able to let go of a 13-year-old's terrible mistake. Katie had kept a bracelet she'd received from Jasmine as a birthday gift on her wrist for 11 years after she lost her best friend. She developed a nervous habit of fiddling with it. The quirk hadn't gone away in the 3 years since Ashley had ripped the bracelet from Katie's arm at Park Days Festival. Tess could see the girl who had been Jasmine's best friend still in the young woman standing in front of her at the river. After all, Jasmine had loved Katie. Just for a moment, Tess could see that Katie wasn't the villain in this story. But it was just a moment before Katie made her fatal error. She suggested that Jasmine knew the Thompson boys were coming over that awful night. Tess knew that was a lie. Tess wasn't her sister's keeper, as much as she would have liked to have been, and maybe she needed to be. After all, she was an adult now, much older than Jasmine had ever been. She could see what Katie was doing, lying. Even after all this time, even as Tess was ready to forgive, had she learned nothing? This is what Ashley told Josh after he came out of the memory. It was a terrible mistake. Tess didn't mean to make Katie fall over. She didn't push her. She was just so angry that Katie's lies ripped away the relief she had in her grasp. She screamed and Katie fell, slipping fast in the mud and the back of her head colliding with a jagged rock. The thud was loud enough to hear over the rushing water. Ashley scrambled to Katie lying in the riverbed, almost at the water's edge. Tess seemed frozen in place, staring down at Katie's unmoving body. "What did you do?" Ashley screamed up at Tess. Her cousin's voice seemed to wake Tess in the reality of the situation. Tess began pleading that she didn't mean it. "Didn't you hear the lies? I didn't mean to. It'll just be a concussion. She's breathing, right?" Katie was unresponsive as Ashley tried to softly shake her. She supported Katie's neck with one hand while she tapped her face with the other, but quickly laid her back down. Josh winced as he saw Ashley's hand come away covered in blood. Josh had turned away, but Manu urged him to watch. He needed to see. Tess panicked at the sight of blood. She went between screaming for Katie to wake up and telling her she didn't mean it. Ashley was feeling for a pulse and starting CPR when she couldn't find anything, pushing her cousin to fall in the mud beside Katie. Tess sat on her knees, white jeans covered in mud, saying sorry over and over again. Ashley felt for a pulse a second time. She put her finger under Katie's nose and waited for a moment before sitting back on her feet, dejectedly looking out to the water. Tess asked her cousin what she was doing. She needed to keep going. Tess took over CPR, her wet hands slipping off Katie's shirt as she pumped her chest at odd intervals. Tess told Ashley to call an ambulance, but Ashley didn't move. She just stared at her cousin, knowing if they called an ambulance, Tess's life would be over. Her parents would have one child dead and the other in prison. Ashley's own parents would be just as devastated. Ashley couldn't lose Tess either, neither could Josh. Katie was already gone. Calling an ambulance wouldn't save her. When Tess realised Ashley wasn't doing anything but staring, she yelled at her to do something. "What are you doing?" Ashley got up and told Tess to do the same. There was nothing they could do. They needed to get out of here before anyone might see. They needed to put Katie somewhere. Tess refused to believe Katie was dead and told Ashley they needed to get her help. Her cousin responded by telling Tess, "Fine, let me help." Tess stood back, and Ashley took Katie's car keys, wallet and phone from her jacket pockets. She used Katie's finger to open her phone with Touch ID and changed the settings so the phone wouldn't auto-lock. Then she started taking Katie's jacket off her body. Tess asked what she was doing, and Ashley replied, "Helping." She proceeded to remove Katie's work clothes, and Tess could only watch in horrified silence as she realised what was happening. She'd committed a crime, and Ashley was covering it up. Josh could see the terror and anguish on Tess's face. He knew she was caught between her instinct of doing the right thing by calling for help and doing what was going to save her own life. Ashley had already made the decision for her. She'd become so good at it. She'd done it for Tess so many times. Ashley bundled up Katie's clothes, leaving her body in only her underwear. Tess said she'd get cold. Ashley put her hand on Katie's head and whispered what Josh thought was, "I'm so sorry." Tess cried while Ashley rolled the body once, twice towards the edge. The third would have done it, but Tess told her to wait. She plucked the bracelet from where she had dropped it by the river and rubbed the mud off before leaning down and clasping the silver chain onto Katie's wrist. Ashley wanted to tell her to stop. It wasn't smart. But Katie's wrist was limp as her cousin shakily attached the bracelet around it, and Ashley followed her arm up to a face that was covered by wet dark hair, still being relentlessly pelted by rain. It was so undignified. If this was to be her burial, Katie deserved something more than a naked body pushed into an unforgiving river. Tess let out a sob as she dropped Katie's wrist, the bracelet back where it belonged. Ashley thought about how it was right Katie had the bracelet back, and she gave her body a final push into the water. It was hers, after all. The body was immediately taken by the current, which was ferocious due to the copious rain from that day. Josh ran along the riverbed to see if her body would reappear. She wasn't dead yet, he knew. She was drowning right in front of him, and there was nothing he could do. He ran until it didn't make sense anymore and just stood there, immobilized by time. Ashley tells Tess they have to go and shoves her hands into the river to wash the blood off, making Tess do the same. There's blood on the rock, so they throw it into the water before gathering Katie's things and walking into the trees for cover. Josh and Manu follow to see Ashley giving Tess her long puffer jacket and directing her cousin to walk to her parents' house alone. Tess is quiet as Ashley barks her orders. "Walk home. Don't stop or talk to anyone. Immediately go and take a shower and wash your clothes. Take my phone with you. Once you get home, call Manu from my phone and tell him to meet me at Birmingham Station in a couple of hours. If your parents come home, say I've gone to bed. I'll call my phone from Manu's when I can. Don't worry, I won't be long." Tess tried to object, but Ashley just repeated the instructions until Tess complied, repeating them back. Josh watched his wife walk off through the trees into the now dark late afternoon. He wanted to go with her. She shouldn't be walking in the dark alone, even if it was only 6 p.m. Ashley crouched down for a moment and let out a shaky breath. She composed herself, then swapped into Katie's loafers. She was about to shrug on Katie's coat too, but noticed blood on the collar. It was a problem she'd solve later. Ashley shivered as the wet collar touched the back of her neck. It was only then that Josh noticed the resemblance between Ashley and Katie. They didn't look alike at all in the face, but from a distance, they both had the same long, dark hair and similar builds. He saw Ashley's plan. She bundled her own clothes into the handbag Katie had brought with her and started looking through Katie's phone. Manu told him they didn't have to watch anymore. He and Ashley, who would be waiting for them outside the experience, could explain the rest. Ashley was checking for where Katie was meant to be. There was a group chat on Messenger with a party for that night. There were a lot of people in the group chat, so Ashley felt like it would be an easy sell to send a message saying Katie felt sick and couldn't go anymore. She figured she could drive Katie's car back to the address that was on her ID and send a message from there. If it looked like Katie had gotten home, the investigation would focus there and not the river. Josh watched Ashley don the dead woman's beanie and gloves before disappearing through the trees, as Manu told him how she covered up the whole thing rather masterfully. There were ways she could have been caught, but they didn't matter if Ashley managed to pull one thing off, making any person or camera that caught her on her way back to Katie's home register her as Katie. If the police believed Katie made it home, then any hair or trace DNA left by Ashley in Katie's car or flat could be a friend's or a client's from another time. It would become irrelevant, and as evidenced by all the years that had gone by, Ashley had pulled it off. Josh and Manu exited Nostalgia with the former reeling. Ashley was waiting for them in the waiting room. She managed to hold Josh's eyes for a few brief moments, placing her hand on his back softly as she directed him to sit down. Josh didn't know what to say at first. His skin went hot and cold. He wanted to lament over what Tess had been part of and how she'd never told him. He wanted to express his anger at what Manu and Ashley kept from him, but he also knew they deserved his gratitude for what they'd done, protecting Tess, letting them have the life they had. It had all been for them, and here he had been, thinking they were the murderers. In Josh's silence, Ashley felt it best to start talking instead of waiting for him to start asking questions. Both she and Tess had come up with a clue setting in Nostalgia. It was Tess's diagnosis that prompted them to talk about it properly for the first time in almost 40 years. They agreed to put all their memories into the program, with the exception of the night of Katie's death. The clues would be there, but not the smoking gun. Ashley would wait until she was older and frailer, to ensure she wasn't discovered until her life was almost over. Only then would she go into Nostalgia one final time to give the memory and provide the definitive answer. After Tess and Ashley had both given their memories just a couple of months prior to Tess's death, Manu and his wife had not been back into Nostalgia to explore what had been added. Josh's interest in the program was a natural one, but it wasn't until after Ashley and Manu had suggested giving him a present via the whole group going into Nostalgia that it came to fruition. They suggested the festival as a way to see how the memory appeared, knowing it would be the greatest clue inside Nostalgia to what had happened to Katie. It seemed like a perfect plan. It was a weekend they had all been together and made total sense to go back as a group, providing a perfect cover for Ashley and Manu to view the experience together without having to front a great cost. They weren't counting on Josh picking up on the precise moment Katie lost the bracelet. Ashley and Manu never knew how invested he was in Katie's case, or that Josh had spoken to her inside or outside of the VIP tent. They didn't know about Shanti's warning. They expected to simply view the sequence of events to confirm the bracelet loss as the Nostalgia detective's biggest clue that would lead them to the truth. They expected it would take years to find. The only information any detectives would have to go off was that Katie had lost the bracelet 3 years prior to her death. Narrowing it down to the moment in the tent would have taken too many nostalgia trips, likely between many people. Ashley seemed to think Josh should be proud of how quickly he put it together, "Aren't you sorry?" Josh asked. Were any of them really sorry, if they weren't going to pay for it? Tess didn't mean to kill Katie, but her actions caused Katie's death. Ashley and Manu helped cover it up. Sure, they felt guilty enough to confess, but they didn't let it ruin their lives. Katie's family died without knowing what happened to her. It was still so wrong. Ashley told Josh that of course she was sorry. That's why they'd done all this. They could have let Katie's story stay lost and preserved their innocence for eternity. They did all this because they knew it wasn't right. They deserved to be remembered for who they really were. Josh wasn't sure it was up to Ashley or Tess how they were remembered. Being remembered is never really up to the person in question. Though, he reasoned, what else could they do but provide their own version of events for others to dissect and come to their own conclusions about? It was like a celebrity memoir, according to Ashley. They can tell their own story with as much sympathy for themselves as possible, but it doesn't mean the readers will find them sympathetic. It was what Nicolina had done with nostalgia after all. She'd become a B user to preserve the happiest few months of her life inside the program. She knew Ben was never going to put his memories inside. There were so few occasions when they let anybody else see them as a couple during their time together. It could only be her memories that would commit their relationship to history. If anyone ever found them, she hoped they would create an alternate universe for her and Ben. One where they communicated better, where she left George sooner, where she didn't spend her life in heartbreak. It made Josh feel mucky. He'd always seen the good nostalgia could do. For the first time, he was seeing how it could all be used to make things worse. Ashley's desire to protect Tess wasn't wrong in his eyes, but the actions she took to do it were. Josh asked how she got away with it. Far away, sure, she could pass for Ashley, but close up, there was no way. Ashley smiled. She never let anyone see her close up, and the cameras were all too far away. The movie cameras in 2017 were crystal clear, but it was diabolical how ancient the CCTV cameras were still in Birmingham. Anyone trying to zoom in on her face would have been met with a mosaic of pixels. It was still risky, but calculated risk. It helped Ashley's cause that Katie was somewhat of a loner when it came down to it. She had a family and a group that invited her to parties, but when it was all said and done, she was alone at the end of each day. Ashley had driven Katie's car back to her flat with the intention of simply parking it out in the front and sending a couple of messages from Katie's phone before walking away. But as Ashley drove the hour-long journey, she started to think of all the flaws in her plan. Katie's phone and keys would be in the car. If any cameras picked her up as she parked out the front of her house and left, it would be strange that she didn't take her things with her and go inside. The more she drove, the more Ashley became convinced she needed to go inside Katie's home and put her things there. She was already wearing Katie's clothing and driving her car. She couldn't chicken out from going far enough to make it worth it. She could put the clothes in the wash Katie had been wearing and change into a dressy outfit, make it look like Katie was still intending to go to the party, create an even better misdirect. Ashley knew there were a few key problems. Her fingerprints and hair in Katie's car and flat. What to do with her phone. Anybody who might see her and realize she wasn't Katie. She dealt with them all systemically. A color-coded list forming in her head as she drove. Ashley had worn Katie's gloves and beanie as she drove the car home, in an effort to leave as little evidence as possible that could identify her. She would leave them on the entire time she was in the house. Being seen and recognized as not Katie was Ashley's biggest concern. She needed to get inside Katie's building, then also get inside her flat and back out again without being seen up close. When Ashley arrived, she was somewhat relieved to see it was a relatively quiet street. The few people around didn't take much notice of her as she walked up to Katie's terrace building, noticing it seemingly had 4 or 5 flats. It didn't look like there were any lights on in flat 2. It was now or never. She grabbed Katie's tote bag and gave the car a quick once-over before jumping out when the walkers on the street seemed far enough away. Her gloved hands fumbled with the keys as she tried a couple before landing on the correct one for the building entrance. Ashley felt her blood thumping in her ears as she imagined the police reviewing footage of this moment. Did she forget which one was her front door key? but she made it inside, then got to Katie's door without anybody seeing her. She tied up her hair and shoved it inside the beanie before she went inside, with gloves still on. Katie's apartment smelled like cinnamon and stuffy air. There were dirty dishes in the sink and by the couch. Her small dining table had only one chair. Ashley took off Katie's shoes and left them by the door, along with her coat. She then took the rest of Katie's clothes from the bag and put them in her washing machine on a long wash. Ashley told the group chat she was excited to see everyone, should be there around 9. She looked through the rest of Katie's messages. They were mostly from people looking to arrange viewings for open homes. There was one from her mother saying, "Drive safe, kiss kiss," sent 3 hours ago. Ashley winced as she opened it and gave a heart react. There was a message from her dry cleaners asking when she would like to pick up her items. She responded with, "I'll be there on Monday morning," a safe message that suggested she would be somewhere then. Ashley went into the bedroom and found an outfit that seemed appropriate out of the clothes strewn about Katie's room. She was careful to keep the gloves and hat on as she changed. Once everything seemed like it was in order, Katie's clothes from the day in the wash, messages sent, new outfit on, Ashley walked out of the flat wearing the same coat Katie had on that day. It was the only item that had blood, so it needed to end up where it made sense for the crime scene to be. She pulled her hair free from the beanie before she exited the building, stuffing it into the same bag Katie had with her during the day. Ashley had tried to find a more appropriate bag in Katie's room that would serve to look like she was going out for the night, but that could also hold her own clothes and shoes, but nothing was big enough, so she figured this one would have to slide. There was a bag of unopened quavers sitting at the bottom of the bag. Ashley ignored it, the thought of anything she might be forgetting swirling around in her mind as she attempted to cool her face down. But then she had a thought. What could be more casual, more indicative of someone with no fear of what's to come than eating a bag of crisps as you walk down the street? Ashley covered her face with her hair as she exited the building, making sure to look down at Katie's phone as she walked. There was a canal a few blocks from Katie's home that was on the way to the station. She pulled out the quavers and opened them, popping one into her mouth. It was hard and starchy on her tongue and made her stomach lurch. Maybe this wasn't such a good idea. This was only more evidence against her after all. Katie's coat scratched against her skin, and her body became all too hot. What was she doing? It needed to be over, now. Ashley maneuvered into the dark trees lining the canal, until she was by the water. Once she was sure nobody could see her, Ashley turned off Katie's phone and threw it into the water. She took off Katie's clothes and shoes, quickly replacing them with her own and tying her hair into a bun. Then she stuffed the open quavers into the handbag, along with the rest of Katie's items and a rock she found on the canal's edge. She took one more look around before dropping the bag into the water, waiting only a moment to see the frayed material disappearing under the surface before she walked towards the train station. She caught the train to Birmingham's main station, where Manu was already waiting, in distress, to drive her home. He'd been there for almost an hour and was on the verge of blowing the whole thing by coming to look for her when she arrived. Ashley described the horror of the next week as they waited for a knock on the door that never came. The news only reported about the bracelet as the key piece of evidence. Nothing about other female DNA found in Katie's car or home. Nothing about how it was unusual for Katie to take such a big bag out on the town with her. Nothing about another woman's hair found in her beanie or different saliva on the quavers bag. Her last reported sighting was noted as leaving her home to attend a party around 8 p.m. on Friday, November 28th. They could hardly believe it. They could still hardly believe it all these years later. Josh could tell by the look on Ashley and Manu's faces as they got to this point in the story. It seemed Josh had missed out on quite some conversations between Ashley, Tess and Manu over the years, the theme of those conversations oscillating between relief and dread. What was right for him to do next? Tess and Ashley had now put all their memories into nostalgia. The truth of Katie's death was in there, waiting for someone to look. Could he just let it be? What was the value of a painful truth when nobody's life stood to improve at its exposure? It wouldn't bring Katie back. A confession while Tess was alive, or for Ashley and Manu now, would have simply been punishment without justice. Josh had children to think about, a son and daughter who he did not want caught up in a media circus if he exposed the truth about what their mother had done. The scandal Tess had circumvented would only fall to them. Ashley told Josh that Tess had planned for this possibility. The day before Tess went into nostalgia to give her scan, she sat at home on her favourite chair, and when Josh was out, had had a conversation with nobody. It was a final message for her husband, in the event that he discovered her deepest secret. Ashley, Manu and Josh were still in nostalgia's waiting room. Now Josh understood why the couple had kept him here to explain it all. Because they wanted him to go right back in to see Tess's message. It all felt too overwhelming. His mind wasn't yet adjusted to the information on what had happened to Katie and who Tess had really been. But Josh desperately wanted answers, and this was the only chance he had to get them from his wife. When he got inside, he was greeted with a russet-coloured couch in his own living room. Tess was sitting in her tulip-decorated armchair beside it, holding a cup of tea. He took a readying breath and heard Tess take one a moment after him. He flicked his eyes over to her quickly, his brain tricking him for a moment into thinking she might be able to see him, but her eyes were looking past him to their front garden. Josh felt a glob in his throat as he took in his wife, frail and misty-eyed in her chair. She had less than 2 months at this stage, and Josh barely left her side. Where had he been? Tess cleared her throat and began to speak shakily. I suppose you're here now, if you ever make it here. I hope you don't, and I can beg for forgiveness in the afterlife, if we're lucky enough to have one. I'm not sure I'll be seeing the pearly gates if all that exists, but I know you will. I don't know how to say I'm sorry to have never told you about it all. I know you'll hate that. You were always here for me, for everything. So I don't want you thinking it's because I couldn't trust you. That's never been the case. You're such a wonderful person, such a fair person. I knew you'd be in agony over what the just thing to do would be. I knew you'd remain in agony regardless of whatever choice you'd make. You deserve better than that kind of life. You deserve better than me, really. And selfishly, I didn't want to face Cara and Ollie knowing what I'd done. I wanted to be here for them as a mother, as long as I had. I couldn't bear the idea of them having to tell people their mother was in jail. Better to tell them their mother did a terrible thing long ago, and they didn't find out until after she was gone. No matter what they might think of me then, they will always have you to be proud of, and some good memories of me to counter the horribleness of what I've done. I felt so much guilt and shame after it happened. You tried to ask me what was wrong, and I made up silly excuses about work that I knew you didn't understand, but you were still so good to me. At first, I was sick with worry the police were going to show up at my door at any moment. But after time passed, and it was obvious the case was cold, I knew I had to make a choice. Turn myself in, or put it behind me and try to live a life I could be proud of. It's why I left that stuffy banking job and became a therapist. I wanted to do better by the Jasmines and Katies in the world. I wanted to do better by the other versions of myself out there, to help them see past their anger and pain. I know I've done a lot of good here, but I also know it's a small salve to the immeasurable pain caused by facilitating the end of someone's life. If you do see this, my love, tell the kids I'm sorry for leaving you all with the truth after I'm gone. I suppose I'm only really a coward in the end. What a life we've had together. I can only hope it hasn't been all tainted for you now, but I want you to know that you are the finest man I ever met, and being with you made me a better person. I know I needed that. I'm sorry to leave you with such a burden. It's not fair that the best people are always the ones who carry the greatest of loads. I'm I'm now going to wait for you to come through the door, blissfully unaware. You're off helping Kara fix her computer like the wonderful father you are. I'm going to enjoy every stolen moment we have left. I love you." Her eyes brimmed with tears, and she rested her head against the chair. Josh cried as he sat beside her on the couch, desperate for a final hug. Tess was not going to speak again. He decided there wouldn't be any harm in giving her hand a touch now. He did, and he saw his wife's eyes light up in the way they always had for him, like it was a regular Tuesday. He hugged her tightly and breathed her in, and he knew their life had been everything he thought it was. When Josh exited his wife's memory, he took himself home and holed himself up for a number of days before making a decision on what to do with the information he had. He could go straight to the police and allow them to solve the case, his story now corroborated by what's inside Nostalgia. But he worried about what would happen to Ashley. It had been almost 50 years since she covered up Katie's death. At 72 years old, she might still live another 30 years. She may receive sympathy via a more lenient sentence, but she could also spend the rest of her life in jail. Regardless of what was just, Josh felt indebted to Ashley for what she had done. He knew whatever punishment she received would devastate Manu's life too, and that was something he couldn't be responsible for. Besides, Ashley had voluntarily put the memory of the night of Katie's death inside Nostalgia, knowing it could lead to her discovery. She had already made the choice to take the risk. Josh just didn't want to accelerate the process. He could direct someone else to look into the night of Katie's death inside Nostalgia, and they could be the ones who held the responsibility of exposing Ashley to the world, but the outcome would still be the same for her. Passing the responsibility on like it was a football didn't seem like the way to go either. Tess sat in her armchair and passed responsibility for this onto him. And while God knows he loved her, it wasn't fair. He didn't want to be a passive consumer of Katie's story and do nothing. Nor did he want to be the great revealer and destroyer of his friends' lives. Josh was lucky. He had time to come up with his own way to acknowledge his receipt of the truth. He found himself turning to what he always did: games. He barely slept for a week while he sketched out his idea before telling Ben he had a new game for development. Inside the game, two friends would be separated in a crime-ridden city run by an evil family of overlords. Users would be able to play as either of the two friends, Jasmine or Katie, to try and find their way back to each other through a series of increasingly difficult missions. Josh didn't want this to be an ordinary game, where the playable characters acted as an easy stand-in for the user playing. He wanted the characters to have complex backstories that were revealed through missions and ended up becoming integral to completing the game. It would take years to develop, but this is exactly what Josh wanted. It would be his last game, and he wanted it to be what he was remembered for. Ben readily agreed and devoted himself to its creation alongside Josh. Mav had quietly put up some of the seed money, no questions asked. He never had been a good saver, so it was a gesture Josh knew meant a lot. It took 4 years and 7 months for Josh, Ben and their team to finish Jasmine's oath. Josh was almost 79 years old when he locked the game's IP away on a secure server to be left untouched and unplayed until he was ready for its release. It was another 12 years after that before Josh's will was read to his children, Kara and Ollie. Kara and Ollie already knew the contents of the will. They knew their mother's story and what was going to be revealed to the world. They knew their dad had been working on a game to leave behind as his own testament to their aunt and her best friend. He'd told them he wanted to make people interested in Jasmine and Katie's stories so they could go on and find them in Nostalgia. He didn't want them to be another quickly consumed story of horror that people gorged on like their deaths were entertainment. He wanted to make Jasmine and Katie as real as possible to those who played his game. He wanted them to feel the emptiness of the years that were stolen away. He also wanted there to be a record of Darren and Jai Thompson's names and what they had done, which he ensured he baked into the final revelatory mission in the game. Josh hated to think of them, let alone speak their names. To do so would be to acknowledge the depraved evil in the world he tried to avoid as much as he could. But he knew recording their names in the game would mean something, even if it was only to record the kind of people they were to a world that had long forgotten them. The only thing Cara and Ollie didn't know was how to access Jasmine's oath and release it to the world. The day after Josh's children left the solicitor's office with his instructions in hand, they sent the game live. It took Josh a couple of months after his nostalgia experience to tell his children what he'd discovered. Their shock did what it usually does to loving children learning of their parents' misdeeds. It sent them into a rage and denial. But once nights had been slept on the information, they remembered their mother's distress over Jasmine and her overprotective nature that continued right up until her children were in their 30s. Cara and Ollie eventually came to accept it could be true. Seeing it all in nostalgia made them understand and reconcile the image they had of their mother and the woman she was in totality. They weren't ready for Josh to go to the police. They said they needed the time to adjust to the idea of what had happened and what their reality might become once the truth was revealed to the world. So Josh agreed to wait, something that was easy for him to do, given it's what he already wanted. The three Landrys expected it wouldn't take too long before someone went back to the night of Katie's death inside nostalgia and discovered Ashley's memory waiting for them. After all, Katie's murder was a cold case on the nostalgia detectives list. Before being added to the official list of cold cases, all crimes were given a basic investigation inside nostalgia to see if there were any clues. It meant someone would have looked into Katie's case and found nothing in the program around the time she disappeared, and this information was included as part of the information on the listing available online. All it would take now was for someone to decide Katie's death was worth revisiting. Someone would uncover the truth, and nobody would even have to know that Josh had figured it out. After all, he only gave his memories from before the first time he entered nostalgia. So instead, Josh got to work on his game with Ben, and soon enough, they had all the missions planned out, then they started the digital build, then it was 4 years later, and they were almost finished, and still there was nothing. No news articles, no viral posts, no nostalgia detectives announcement. Katie's name sat there, buried among 1,000 others on the cold case list, her files skimmed, checked, archived, and ultimately passed over. She had been added, yes, but no one had cared enough to look beyond the basic facts and obvious clues. Nobody had looked into her backstory. Katie had been forgotten. When they were building out the final mission on Jasmine's oath, Josh spent his spare time sitting on the couch across from Tess's armchair every day, staring at the space she once occupied. He'd had an idea for some time on what he'd do in this situation. The truth was waiting in nostalgia, but there was nobody in the world left waiting for the truth. Josh stood up from the couch, where he'd sat faithfully by his wife's side for 50 years, and he took a seat in her chair. It was still moulded to her body and dug into his in strange places. Then he began to speak. It had just gone 6 p.m. when he started recounting his nostalgia experience, and the moon was high in the sky by the time he finished. When Josh sat down in Tessa's armchair that day, he was 81 and still 10 years away from his death. He went to nostalgia for the final time the following day, placing this memory and the creation of Jasmine's oath as he did so. The story Josh told is what you have just heard over the past 3.5 episodes. This has been a faithful retelling of his account, coupled with details we have pulled from nostalgia. Putting this story together came about because of Jasmine's oath. The final mission in the game revealed Jasmine and Katie's characters were based on real people, as were their captors, Darren and Jai. Setting them free relied on the player using nostalgia to look into their deaths. Sure enough, it was a media firestorm for a few days and made a great story. Josh had left a message for the first person who won to find his recounting inside the program, completing the story's arc. Ultimately, this story has been Josh's, much more than Katie's. The same applies for the game Josh and Ben created in Jasmine and Katie's memory. While we believe Josh gave a faithful account of what had happened, and that he and Ben operated with only well-meaning intentions, we also believe there was a lot that was missed or glossed over. We wanted to spend some time trying to correct this for our version. When we set out to tell this story, we explored many ways to begin. One approach was to start with Katie's life and trace it chronologically, weaving Jasmine's story in alongside hers. It would have been the truest way to honour the victims, two young girls bound by friendship, then betrayal, then tragedy. But that version lacked the dramatic pull we'd come to expect in stories like this. A slow drift from sweetness to devastation doesn't hold attention the way a murder mystery does. Storytelling is, after all, the art of revelation, of timing what's told and when. To make an audience care about two sweet girls, you need to reveal something awful happens to them later. We thought about using Josh's real audio from his speech inside Nostalgia, but that only highlighted the importance of his voice in this story, which we already felt had enough in it. Katie couldn't speak for herself. She left no memories, no final say. All we have are the versions of her that exist in other people's minds. And that became our central challenge, because in every medium, murder stories are told not by the victim, but those left behind. Josh told the truth as he saw it, and he told it with care. But even the most well-intentioned truths are shaped by the people who carry them. He called what Katie did at 13 a terrible mistake. He used the same words for what Tess did the night Katie died. But the weight behind those mistakes wasn't treated equally. When it came to Tess, his wife, the mother of his children, there was tenderness, an instinct to protect. With Katie, that same phrase felt quieter, more passive, as though her guilt had already been decided. Josh stopped seeking justice once Ashley told her story, even though he started this journey desperate to help. He accepted her version of events without pushing back. He let his love for his friends, and especially for Tess, soften the story's edges. He believed Tess. He believed Ashley. He believed the group when they said they hadn't seen anything, even though the clues suggested otherwise. And in doing so, Katie was slowly edged out of her own story. Even in death, she wasn't the central figure. Jasmine's oath, the tribute game Josh spent years building, didn't carry her name. She was remembered, but not fully seen. And the Thompson brothers, the ones who started it all, were barely mentioned. Their violence was the root of everything. Jasmine's death, Katie's unraveling, Tessa's fury. But the story kept circling the girls. Who said what? Who invited whom? Who knew? Not what those boys did. Not what they took. Maybe it was too painful to look closely. Maybe Josh believed he was doing right by everyone. Maybe he thought kindness meant looking away. But the way we tell stories matters. The voices we elevate, the people we protect, the ones we let slip quietly into the margins. Josh was a good man, a loving one, but his love shaped his story, and like so many stories, that love ended up centering the people who were left, not the ones who were lost. That's why we left Josh's biases in place, to show how even the most altruistic storytellers can misplace the spotlight. Josh outlived all his friends but Nicolina. Ben was the first to go, not long after Jasmine's oath was tied with a bow and stored away. When Nicolina visited him in hospital to say goodbye, he told her he figured Nostalgia couldn't do much with a dead man's data. He'd added his own memories without telling anybody a few months prior, and she was the only person he was going to let know. He'd gone through the key memories in Katie's case during the creation of Jasmine's oath, and seen Nicolina's memory of the dinner party. He couldn't help but look further into her memories afterwards. He went through all their memories together. He noticed some things missing from his side. How he'd told her he loved her as she slept the morning after their first night together. The time he wrote her a letter to tell her he'd raise her baby, even if it wasn't his, but sent it to the fire. The Polaroid picture he kept of her in the back of his sketchbook for decades. The receipt of his memories in Nostalgia was his parting gift to say, "I loved you too." Ashley died 4 years before Josh did. Manu followed a year later. In that final lonely year, Manu added his own memories to nostalgia. We found them while compiling this story, and they revealed something new. One memory showed Manu picking up Ashley the night she returned from disposing of the last of the evidence. Her recollection of the river wasn't clear. She stumbled over her words. Tess had lunged at Katie. No, she hadn't pushed her. She hadn't touched her. Ashley sounded certain about everything else, the phone, the flat, the blood on the coat, but not this. Manu questioned his wife in only the way he could, but Ashley was resolute. Manu ultimately wasn't there to decide for himself if his doubts had merit, and his devotion to his wife became what allowed him to accept her story outwardly. Privately, Manu went to the riverbank a few years after Katie died, alone, and planted a small tulsi shrub just behind the trees. He didn't tell Ashley. He didn't speak. He just pressed his palms together once before he left. Over time, Ashley's certainty hardened. Tess didn't push her, didn't lunge. Katie recoiled. That was the story. It became the truth. But memory is not the same as fact. Nostalgia can detect when someone tries to alter a memory, but not when they believe something that isn't true. So the version in nostalgia, where Tess screams and Katie falls, may not be what really happened. We'll never know. Ashley's memory was as close to fact as nostalgia could offer, but a memory replayed, retold, and rationalized over 50 years is still only a memory. What really happened between Tess and Katie that night died in the river too. The same uncertainty clouds what happened between Katie and Jasmine when they were 13. Katie claimed Jasmine knew the boys were coming. Tess disagreed. She clung to the version her sister told her, a traumatized child's story. And because Tess lived longer and loved harder and left behind more memories, that's the version that survives. Josh may have found it too painful to dig into that night, and maybe he was right to keep the worst details out. But in softening the horror, he softened the impact of a cataclysmic event. Jasmine took her own life because of shame that wasn't hers to carry. Katie spent the rest of hers haunted by it, lonely, desperate for connection. She never found it. Katie couldn't hold on to relationships. She was warm and eager, good at parties, good to men for a night, everyone's bathroom best friend. But no one ever called her the next day. Even her own mother forgot her birthday. Nobody ever cared enough. It was agony. That's what she wrote in her diary. It is all such agony. That was just weeks before she died. Jasmine and Katie's stories are forever linked, and so it feels fitting that Jasmine's oath could only be won or lost together. Whether Josh and Ben knew it or not, they built a game around the truth. Their lives were intertwined, their fates entangled. The lives they never got to live became their legacy. Sometimes, what could have been is all that is left. We'll end with another diary entry from Katie, from the evidence police collected after her death. Sometimes, I wonder if Jazz and I would even be friends now. People are always telling me that your childhood friends aren't always the ones you take into adulthood. I can't believe that would have been us. But I guess the problem is, I'll never know. Maybe I was meant to share this flat with her and have someone to talk to about how these dates I go on never go to plan. Maybe we would have had a big fight when we were 17 and never spoken again. Maybe there are no meant-to-bes, and there is just what is. My life was always meant to be sad. I don't want to believe it. Until I was 13, I remember mostly being happy. Perhaps I was just naive. But I'd like to believe there's another version of me somewhere who throws the biggest 30th birthday party where Jasmine helps me do it, and my dad is still alive to help set up the decorations, and my mum remembers that I hate yellow and doesn't buy any balloons that colour, and a gorgeous guy who loves me all the way down stands by my side on the podium as I make my thank you speech in a crowd of good friends who remember what I do for a living. If she exists, I'm so jealous of her.
The Cold Case of Katie Christie.